Next step of our project is to start to add some interactivity. In general, in Unity, you'll do that with scripts or components, and those scripts are most frequently written in C#. They can be written in JavaScript or Unity's language. I don't know if it's their language. Another language called Boo. For our course, we're going to use a tool called Playmaker, and this is a asset available in the Unity Asset Store. So to get that, we need to go to Window, open up our Asset Store, and I'm simply going to type Playmaker. My first option here, Playmaker, is the one we want. It is a paid asset. It's very much worth every dollar. I've already purchased it, so my option is just to import, not to purchase. You will need to be logged into your account and have a credit card information to be able to purchase this. Once you've got that all done, purchase it and import it into your program like we did in the last video. So I'm going to import, and I'll rejoin you when I've got Playmaker imported to my project. Now that Playmaker has been imported, we need to do a few more things to get it set up. Playmaker doesn't install ready to go. Comes in as a Unity package. So when you first open it, you'll get a window that looks like this. We can turn this off so it doesn't show up every time that we start up Playmaker. I'd advise you to uncheck that. And I'm just going to click Install Playmaker. We could do a quick pre-update check. And mine's off the screen. Here we go. Didn't find any known conflicts. If you have a project that's already established and has lots of other assets in it, you may find some conflicts. So that's great. And then I'm going to install the current version. It's going to ask me if I want to go ahead. Whenever you add a new asset or a large asset to your project, you do need to be careful. It can occasionally break your project, which is more than discouraging. So it's reminding you here to make a backup. I'm not too worried about it, so I'm just going to push it for now. This is going to decompress and finish the import process. So I'll let this work, and I'll once again rejoin you when it's finished. Okay, it looks like Playmaker has finally finished its install. Once again, because I just started it, it's opened up this window again, giving me some options. I'm going to click or unclick the Show at Startup, as I don't need to see this all the time. But there are some great tutorials here if you want to look at the tutorials provided by the Playmaker organization. There's also some add-ons and such things to explore. So let's close that out and take a look at what we've got. What we've got here now in our project folder, our project view in our asset folder, is a new Playmaker folder. And for the most part, we're not really going to need to get into this folder. We just need to know that it's all there. This also adds an iTween folder, which is an asset that is used by Playmaker. You can just kind of leave that there. And again, this kind of goes to the idea that when you add assets, your project starts to get cluttered. So being really careful about organization is important as your project grows. So what we're going to do with Playmaker is add a simple button to our screen that will toggle between a sunlight and a moonlight. We're going to loosely call this a day-night cycle. It's not very fancy, but gets some basic interactivity working. Before we get there, however, we're going to need to look at Playmaker and what it does, how it functions, and get a little bit familiar with all of that. So Playmaker works with finite state machines, or FSMs. And basically what that means is that a program or code is either in state A, state B, state C, and so on. It's in a very distinct state. What is nice about this is you can see exactly what piece of code, or you know what piece of code is running. Playmaker has some nice visual debugging that we can show as we go along that helps us figure this out. So to have interactivity, we need to have a finite state machine or an FSM in our scene, and we need that to be located on an object. So I'm going to create an empty game object, go into my hierarchy and create, and I'm going to rename this day-night cycle. If I can type. All right, and so this is just an empty object. As you can see in my scene view, there's nothing to look at. It's just a transform. And then I'm going to add a component, and I'm going to just type FSM. Now I get two options here. I get an iTween FSM events. That's not what I'm looking for. I want this Playmaker FSM. I'm going to add that here. So this just adds a component to that empty. And to keep things straight, I'm going to name this. So this first option here is the name of the FSM. So I'm going to call it day-night cycle. And you don't have to name it, but if you get multiple ones, it gets a little tricky. You can also enter in a description, and there's some other options here that you can play with as you build up your knowledge of Playmaker. So this is the component that's going to sit on our game object. This is going to run the code, but at the moment there is no code, and we need to get in and edit that. So if you click the edit button here, it's going to pop up a new window. It looks something like this. Okay, and this is the Playmaker window, for lack of a better term. Now, something to be aware of, this is an undocked window, and if you're on a Windows machine, this will stay on top. If I click on something else, it stays there. Okay, if you are on a Mac, when you click on a window behind it, this will be pushed into the background, and it gets a little tricky to find. Either way, I find it useful to dock it, so I'm going to dock this in my main view here. Shrink down my hierarchy so my FSM is a little bit larger. Now, a couple things have happened here. I clicked on something else, so I no longer have my day-night cycle selected. If I click on that, I get my day-night cycle, and I have a little bit of an FSM started here. You can see my start condition, my start transition, and my first state. You can also see in your hierarchy, I have a icon that indicates that there's an FSM on there. It's an easy way to kind of find where your FSMs are. You also notice that when you added that first FSM, Playmaker adds this Playmaker GUI object. You can just kind of ignore this. It's necessary for it to be there. Sometimes I'll take these and just kind of stick them. You can stick them on your directional light just so they're out of the way, something like that. It does need to be in the scene, but it doesn't need to be any particular place in the hierarchy. So let's click back on the day-night cycle and take a look at what we have here in Playmaker. So here on the left is where the FSM is going to go. And I can click on the state and drag my whole FSM. So we've got this here. This is where we're going to create the structure of our code. Over here to the right is where we're going to add in a lot of the details. So when I've clicked on the state, it's brought me to the state window over here. Okay, so we've got four options here: FSM, state, events, and variables. If I click on the FSM, this is essentially what I saw in my inspector. The name, this is if there's a template, description. I usually don't do very much in here. My state, this is where all the code's going to go. This blank space right here is where the code's going to go. We'll talk about that in a bit. Events. This is what's going to transition from one state to another. I think a lot of this will make sense once we build up an FSM. So we're going to be adding events in here. And then variables. This is where we're going to create the place to store information. That could be letters as a string. It could be a decimal. It could be an integer. It could be vectors. It could be game objects. It could be lots of different things. And they get added in this window. So what we need to do here with our day-night cycle, what we're going to do is create a button that is going to turn on the moon and turn off the sun. And then once that's done, it's going to turn the moon back off and turn the sun back on, or vice versa. Okay. So what we're going to do is have two states. We've already got one state in our FSM, so I'm going to click on that state, make sure I'm in the state tab here. I'm going to rename this. This is going to be daytime. You notice as I do that, I also change over here. Now I need to add another state that's going to be my nighttime. So over here in my FSM view, I'm going to right click and add state. Okay. And I'm going to call that nighttime. Now you can notice this is a global transition. We'll talk about that more later. What this means is that whenever we start, we're automatically going to be in the daytime code. Okay. The nighttime's not connected yet, and we're going to have to add some events to get over there. So we're going to go over to our events tab here, and we're going to add two events. The first one's going to be go to night, and it really is helpful if you name these something appropriate and helpful, so when you're debugging. So I typed that in and pressed enter, and go to day. So we want to be able to go back to daytime. Now, if we look at what we've got here, right here, it has zeros. This tells us how many times it's been used, which is helpful if you get a large FSM. You can also delete them with hitting the X. And this button here is going to be what's called it's going to toggle it into a global transition. I'm going to untoggle that for now. I'm going to come back to my state, or sorry, my FSM, on my daytime. I click on my daytime, left click, and then I'm going to right click, and it's going to bring up this context menu, and I can add a transition. So I'm going to add the transition, go to night. You notice I get a little warning. We can talk about that in a minute. And then I'm going to click on my nighttime. I'm going to do the same thing, right click to add transition, or to bring up the context menu, go to add transition, and go to day. And again, I get an error. And this error is there's nothing connected. So what I'm going to do when I call this event, or when this event happens, I want to come over here to nighttime. So all I'm doing there is clicking on go to night and dragging to go to night, and then vice versa. I'm going to do it like that. So what this is going to do is when I press a button, it's going to go back and forth between these two states. So now that we have these two states, we need to add the ability to go back and forth between these two states. And we're going to do that with an old-fashioned GUI button that's going to appear on our screen. And we're going to do that in the form of actions. So make sure you're in your state view on the right side here. And down below, you should see this action browser. Click on that button, and it's going to open up this tab. I like to dock this with my inspector, so that it's there. I don't have to keep opening it. And what you'll see here is a whole bunch of options. Here's some recent things that I've used in past tutorials. And here's a whole bunch more options. There's a lot in there. It can be pretty good if you're trying to figure out how to do something and simply searching these things and seeing what's available. So what we're going to use first is an old-fashioned GUI button. This is not a button that works with the new GUI system, but it gets us up and running pretty quick. In the next project, we'll talk about the new Unity GUI system. So obviously mine's showing up here, but yours won't. So type in the top here, the search bar, GUI button. And there's a couple ways to do this. You can just double click on this. You could also drag it in if you'd like. I kind of prefer the double click myself. Now I've added it twice because I both double clicked and drug it in. So if I want to get rid of an action, come here to the tool and I come down to remove action. It's that simple. Okay. Now this GUI button is going to appear on my screen. Let's see if it looks there. You can't really see it very well because it's covering the entire screen. So it's made the entire screen dark. Let's come back to Playmaker. So we'll fix that. What we want to do here is change its width and height. So right now the width is 1 and the height is 1, which means it's full screen. So I'm going to change this to maybe 0.1 and 0.1 and go back to my game view and see how that looks. And there you go. Now I got a little button there. It's not pretty, but it's going to get the job done. And like I said, in the next project, we'll look at adding functionality with the new Unity GUI system, which is easier to make look pretty. So I got a bunch of other options here. My send event. So this right now is on my daytime state. So when I press this button, I want it to go to night. That simple. It's going to call this event and come over to this time. Okay. You can put some images on here. You can throw a texture on it. That's great. I'm going to put some text on it, which is this option down here. Just call it go to night. Again, if I go back to my game view, I now have text on my button. Makes it a little bit easier for the player to see what's going on. Okay. And then I'm going to come over to my nighttime, and I'm going to do the same thing. Come to my action browser. I'm going to double click on the GUI button, add that in. And this time the send event is not going to be go to night. It's going to be go to day. Text is going to be go to day. And once again, I'm going to change its size to the same size. Okay. Pretty straightforward. Now, if I come back to my game view, you'll notice that I only have the go to day. And that's because this daytime is the default state. We're not in this nighttime state. Okay. So let's push play and see what happens. I'm gonna push play. I got my button here, and if I click on it, my button toggles. If I come to my Playmaker window, you can see the debug that I mentioned earlier working. It's highlighted in green, showing you that this FSM is working. It also highlights the state that you're currently in. So I'm currently in this state. If I go back to my game view, click on that button, and back to Playmaker, I've switched states. So while Playmaker may have some downsides, it also has a lot more upsides. And that is easy debugging and showing you what state you're in. So that's it for this video. Setting up the GUI buttons. The next video, we'll hook up these buttons to some directional lights so that we get a day and night functionality.